Hello, welcome to Citizens Forum. It is Wednesday, February the 14th, I hope. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes this program happen every couple of weeks. We're going to start. First guest is Steve Gray, who was one of the organizers of the excellent Site C Summit that happened right here in Victoria on, surprisingly, January 26th and 27th. The Site C Summit. So, Steve, maybe you can just tell us maybe why the summit was held, and away we'll go.
Sure. Jack, thanks for having me on the show again.
And you don't even have to tell us why the summit was held. You can tell us actually anything you want to tell us.
Sure. Well, I guess that we organized the summit in response to the decision of Premier Horgan and the NDP government to continue with the Site C project up on the Peace River Valley. That's the hydroelectric dam up there. And we were quite concerned about the decision, and in particular, we want to examine the economic rationale that the Premier had provided us in his press conference on December 11th, and we did that. We had a number of experts come and talk to us about the economic rationale provided by the government, and you know, the sad thing is that there's just no credibility in what the Premier offered as his rationale for continuing with the project.
Can you state that again, perhaps using...
No credibility in the economic rationale provided by the Premier for continuing with the project.
Okay, and that means that what he said about why the government of BC, and I don't even know what he said, it just came and went, but you're saying they're speaking strictly on money terms, there was no reason to go ahead with this.
Correct. Yeah. And so it was good to hear that from some experts sort of reviewing what was said, what was provided by the government and ministers of the government, minister of the Crown in terms of the rationale. And we say that clearly was not the reason for proceeding with the project. We're left, of course, questioning, well, why in heaven's name are we proceeding with such a big expenditure of public funds to create power which the province doesn't need, to violate Treaty 8, a treaty that we're all part of, both the First Nations who are on the other side of the treaty and the public of British Columbia and the Crown on our side. The loss of the sensitive ecosystems, the loss of the farmland up there in a time of climate change and concern about food security. So you have to have a pretty big problem to want to continue with something where you actually have no benefit to the people when you're done.
Yeah, and yet the people who run this province and country are so crazy that is exactly what they're doing.
Yes. I guess the second part of what we heard about was the train wreck coming. So if it wasn't enough to have already gone from, I think Premier Campbell announced it would be a $6.6 billion project. Premier Horgan a number of years later says now it'll be $10.7 billion. We heard some very convincing discussion about where we're going next, and it was described as a train wreck by Andrew Nikiforuk. We look like we're going to have increasing costs, more delays, and then when we're done, we're going to be producing electricity we won't be able to sell for the cost we produce it and lose money every year going forward. So it is really a big problem. Anyway, the point of getting together was to talk about that decision, to examine the rationale with a group of people. Over 400 people came from around the province to talk about the decision. And the second part of our meeting was to talk about the question, really, what I'm calling a democratic deficit. You know, we went into the election, the NDP made its commitments about sending the project to the BC Utilities Commission. The Green Party said they would cancel the project. We had understood from the Premier and various NDP candidates in the election that if the Utilities Commission gave an unfavorable report, they would cancel the project. We got an unfavorable report, and now we're continuing with the project, to the shock of many people. So our second part of our meeting was talking about, boy, it seems like the system is kind of broken. Promises made over such an important decision for the province, which will give us a lot of financial and problems in the future, and some real problems with affordability to live in this province, whether it be hydro rates or whether it be taxes. You know, to pay for this thing in a few years' time. It really seems to run counter to what the NDP stood for in the election in terms of their values and where the government tells us they're bringing us now. So not a happy story, really, but good to get people together to talk about it. I think there's a real hunger to talk about public policy. You know, a forum like that where we had panelists speaking, and then we had working groups talking about the various directions we might head.
Yeah, it
was an interesting meeting.
That the system of government in this country is completely broken. That's what I think. And I mean, it's not only this Site C decision, but the Site C decision lays it out so plainly for everybody to see that, I mean, to me, our governments simply do not work for us. They say what's needed to get themselves elected and control that part of the population that trusts and believes in them. And yet once elected, suddenly John Horgan becomes Christy Clark. It's an amazing transformation, just like Obama became Bush.
Yeah, it's tremendously worrying, and I guess now what we're sort of focusing our energy on is a legal case, an injunction that's been filed by the West Moberly and Prophet River First Nation to fight the government, and we want to get behind them with fundraising and also talking publicly about the point here, which is that if you want to violate the treaty, presumably you need some big public interest reason to do that. And we say there's no public interest in proceeding with this project, so there's no reason to be tearing up that treaty the way they're doing it. And I guess our issue is that we want to study the government's arguments as they're put out in the court case and put them in the light of day and just see what exactly would be the rationale for charging ahead with this thing. We don't see it today, and I don't think we're going to see it in the court case. And I think we can stand with the First Nations on that issue. As well, I think we're sort of concerned that if this project is proceeding, if we are going to go ahead, the same demands we made of the Liberal government to deal with the social dislocation which comes along with big industrial mega projects, the violence against women, violence against children, human trafficking. Where's the plan to deal with that? We were asking the Liberals for that before. Amnesty International has been involved in these kind of calls. We want to see what this government, the Social Democratic government, is going to do about those kinds of social problems. We also heard, I guess, yesterday in the throne speech, the government would be bringing in anti-SLAPP suit legislation. That's the legislation against strategic lawsuits against public participation. Well, BC Hydro presently has a SLAPP suit against a number of people who were peaceful protesters against Site C some years back, and we wanted to see Michelle Mungal tell BC Hydro to end that lawsuit and bring in this anti-SLAPP suit legislation immediately so that we can continue to have public discourse and public dissent to try and make some improvements on the kind of issues you were just raising about where does government go and what is it doing. So there are things to do even with the project proceeding, and we're calling on the government to bring us a plan about the social dislocation, drop that SLAPP suit against the people in the Peace Valley, and then explain itself in court or walk away from this court case in order that an injunction can be brought and construction can be stopped at the site. And calls around the legal stuff are to stop the construction now, or if that's not possible, to stop the construction in the most sensitive areas as determined by West Moberly and Prophet River First Nations.
I think you also want to see a rationale from the government as to why they made the decision they made.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the confusing thing. The Premier stood up in a press conference before the people of British Columbia and said, here's our reasons for proceeding with this, none of which hold water. Only days later, after saying that there's public mismanagement, mismanagement of public funds at BC Hydro, in his press conference, we see that they're letting a contract to a company that's failed previously to deliver the goods for BC Hydro. Hydro had to take over that contract with them. We're seeing a contract being let for a price that is in line with BC Hydro's budget for the project on the spillways, but by golly, we can see that there's qualified and able contractors who are bidding twice as high for that same contract, raising the question of whether or not we're going to be in the same situation we've already been with Site C. Hydro signs a contract with the contractor and then has to augment it with additional money all the way along until they hit the value that the contract is actually worth. So the Premier complained about mismanagement at BC Hydro and then doesn't seem to have done anything about it.
What is some rationale Mr. Horgan used to support the decision to go ahead with Site C that you think is wrong?
Well, I guess an example would be, not on the economic side particularly, but he said in his news conference that the geotechnical problems are behind us And now we see in the court case that's going on that Hydro's putting forward some stuff in there in the process of discovery. We're learning that, oh no, the geotechnical problems haven't gone away.
And people should know the geotechnical problems in this particular disaster are potentially massive, right? It's a game changer.
We heard that
terms of our money.
Absolutely, and that's why we have the big cost overruns at the Muskrat Falls in Labrador, and then the big dam that's being built in Manitoba, the Kiosk Dam. Both of those terrible overruns and desperate situations come from the geotechnical problems at those sites.
You know, I was just thinking that since the Site C decision, I followed it very closely. The story was out of the news basically after less than 3 days. It was gone. And now here we are with the Kinder Morgan thing blowing up. Look at the massive coverage this thing is getting, which is a very divisive issue. It's pitting the people of BC against the people of Alberta based on lies, because actually the biggest union in the country, Unifor, says that the Kinder Morgan pipeline is bad for jobs. So why are we fighting over jobs when the union says it's bad for jobs? And compare that to the coverage the media gave the Site C decision. It was swept under the rug. None of these questions, and there's many more that you know of, are ever answered, and the media just pushes it aside. The role of the media in this, from the beginning, is pivotal, I think.
Yeah, I think it's quite disturbing. We had one of our panels was to talk about the role of the mainstream media, or let's call it the corporate media, versus independent media. And the idea that we're not getting the kind of coverage or the examination of these very important public policy issues is deeply concerning to us. I think more and more we're going to be turning to independent media as our vehicle of learning more. And that means donating to independent media in order that we'll get the stories out there and be able to share them, whether that's on the internet or amongst ourselves in terms of publications and things. Terribly important issues, Jack.
So here we are. What's coming next from the group that organized the Site C Summit and the whole, because there's a whole movement, a province-wide movement out there over Site C?
Well, we tend to be involved, to continue to be involved. I've mentioned the legal case and the kind of work that we'll be doing there. We're also interested in being involved in the ALR review. Largest exclusion of land from the ALR that happened in the history of the province is the removal of the Peace River Valley from the ALR.
I'm sure you'll get a lot of support from Lana Popham.
Hydro is being investigated about its finances by the government, and surely things will come up there that we'll need to look at. And then most of us will be following along with your program, with things like DSMOG, with other independent media outlets to learn more about what's happening as investigative reporters do their work, and we'll be paying attention. And then there'll be lots more work within the NDP, and I guess outside the NDP, in terms of the changes in policies of the government.
Is there a fight going on within the NDP over this?
There was a NDP provincial council met just after the Site C Summit, and some motions came forward there, and there was discussion there and discussion from the floor about the Site C issue. I think more and more people within the NDP, as they learn and become aware of what's been going on here, will be concerned, and there'll be more debate happening there for sure.
Steve, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on your show again, Jack.
And thank very much to you and the group that organized the Site C Summit, because it was great. It was like a little bloop of what democracy could and should be looking like. People getting together and then telling our governments what to do instead of our governments telling us what to do.
Yeah, if you can Google Site C Summit, and you'll come up with, you can see many of the videos. It was live streamed, and so those that material is available for people to take a look if they're interested.
SiteCsummit.ca.
.ca, that's right.
SiteCsummit.ca. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Okay, welcome back. And we have with us today Dermot Travis from Integrity BC. And well, we know ICBC's in a mess, and we can't really figure out what the heck's going on. And the thing is, we have guys like Dermot actually digging into the facts and really looking at what's happening with ground corporations like ICBC. So we're going to ask Dermot a few pressing questions today on exactly what's happening. So welcome to the show, Dermot.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
And I guess the thing is, okay, you know, everybody's reading in the papers, and the ICBC's in the hole again, and it all looks like this is a disaster, and we don't know where it's all headed. So I guess most people are wondering, oh, how the heck did they get us so bad in the hole? You know, like we're not talking about a few million here. We're talking like $1 billion, which is 1,000 million. Now that's a pretty big boo-boo in my books. Like, how the heck could...
That's a few Johnson Street bridges.
Yeah,
right
like,
there.
yeah, exactly. And oh, by the way, that would be you know, maybe 1,002 affordable housing units, or it could be a lot of very good things for us. So I think the question is first, you know, how did they manage to get us so far in debt?
Well, I think there's two issues to look at. Number one, you often hear that the government took money out of ICBC.
Yeah.
And you often hear the figure $1.3 billion. Well, that's technically correct if you're starting at the point where the former Premier, Christy Clark, came to power.
Yeah.
If you're talking about the whole 16 years of the BC Liberals being in power, it's $3.2 billion.
Wow.
And when you hear those numbers, it's not just the $3.2 billion they've taken out. It's all of the earning capacity that money might have made in the markets, which is the reserves that an insurance company is supposed to keep on hand in case things go south. That has also been taken out because that money is not earning income for ICBC. That money is going to balancing the budget, the so-called balanced budgets of the last 5 years.
For the government's balanced budgets.
For the government's balanced budget. So it's been going into trade missions to Asia, not into building infrastructure that is safe and affordable in BC, and stabilizing the reserves at ICBC. And, you know, it catches up with you one day. One day, you have to pay the piper. And quite frankly, it would have been nicer for the Liberals to have to suffer the inglory, if I can put it that way, of having to admit their faults from the government side. But such is life. Politically, it's working out that the current government, the NDP, have to point out what went wrong. And the Liberals can now criticize the NDP for not doing anything about it to fix it. So
basically, the biggest issue is the government has just been dipping into ICBC funds and using it for their own purposes. And there are issues there around, if you're a driver, it's just almost like you're being taxed again. Like, you know, the drivers have to pay the tab, and the provincial government's dipping their hands into that fund. I mean, there's obviously a problem there. But on top of that, you see so much being written right now about how they're explaining why they're so in the hole, but they're using a whole bunch of other numbers. So, I mean, can we go over some of that to show that whether or not there's validity in what they're saying?
Well, I think the most important fact for viewers to keep in mind, and the public at large, when it looks at any statistic that comes out of ICBC, because I think of all the crown corporations, ICBC will win the championship for the most abusive use of statistics in BC. They're allergic to one statistic, severe allergy. They never use it at the risk of it breaking out and the public learning about it. That ratio is per 100,000.
Right.
They're allergic to ratios. So they talk about a gigantic increase in crash rates. And they have a little PDF on their website, Quick Statistics, which is designed for the media. And you won't find the word ratio in the last one I looked at. And you certainly won't find any ratios. But when you look and take away this 5-year average that they come up with for crashes, that they change the 5 years to suit whatever the political message is at the time, and you calculate the number of drivers on the road, or you calculate the number of policies ICBC has written, what you find is accident rates are not going up, they're going down. And unlike Transport Canada, which distinguishes between a fender bender in a parking lot and a massive car accident with fatalities. ICBC doesn't do that. So it just lumps them all together. They're all crashes. And you'll hear a statistic, I think it's 330,000 crashes we had last year.
Yeah.
Well, that could include somebody backing out of their driveway and hitting a telephone pole accidentally. It could also include a 20-car pileup on the Coquihalla Highway.
Yeah.
That is not the data that ICBC should be putting out. They should be putting out the data that allows us to distinguish.
Do you think they actually do have that?
Oh, yes.
They have that distinctions, and they know what is what, but they've decided just to lump it together.
Yeah,
That's what's
because it suits the political argument.
Yeah.
Now, I say yes with such authority about it because I think any objective analyst on ICBC in the public today will all agree on one thing. The data is crap from the Crown Corporation. They manipulate data to suit their own purposes, or they don't release data that every other insurer in Canada releases. And it's that data, particularly in 2018, that allows watchdogs be able to decide whether or not you're actually telling the truth and doing a good job.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many things that have been being said. I mean, there's, David Eby is now talking about putting a cap on the payout for
soft tissue injury.
Soft tissue injuries. Like that's kind of the first level of payout. Do you think that that would have an effect on the overall expenses for ICBC?
Well, yes, number one. And number two, I think he should have gone further. I think he should have implemented probably the model that Saskatchewan and Manitoba have. Quebec has a slightly different model.
Yeah.
But what all three of them share, public auto insurers, number one. Number two, they're all profitable.
Yeah.
In 2017, all these crashes, et cetera, that have decimated ICBC, well, somehow it doesn't happen in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Quebec, even though our accident rates are pretty well comparable.
And they're all public insurers.
All public insurers. Now, all three share something that ICBC doesn't share, and they share no-fault insurance.
Okay.
The two, which David Eby didn't use the words when he talked about the soft injury cap, but it is in fact no-fault insurance. He should have done it across the board. Now, for those who say, well, you're denying me my right to sue. Damn it, I want to go to court. Well, buy an optional insurance package, which is what you can do in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. If you want that right to sue, on the off chance you might have a car accident that requires a lawsuit, fine, pay us for it. We'll insure you for it.
Yeah.
They should have gone that route. I think when you look at who is on side and who opposes a government decision, you learn a lot.
Yeah.
And there's only one voice that I can really hear opposed to the soft tissue cap, and that's the Trial Lawyers Association of BC. And my heart bleeds for them. I understand that contingency fees are walking out the door with this proposal.
Yeah.
But they're also British Columbians, and it's time for them to suck it up and recognize that we can't afford to subsidize trial lawyers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you may know, but how much does the ICBC spend on lawyers per year?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Again, they don't release sufficient data to let you actually know. I came up with a figure, I think, of about $120 million in the last 15 fiscal months.
Yeah.
And they've switched their fiscal year to confuse everything all over again. But that $120 million, we don't know if it's for legal fees or whether it's for legal fees plus settlements or whether it's just for settlements. We don't know how many lawyers they have on staff that should be included in that, that they don't go out to hire a firm. And we don't know if some of the settlements also contain legal fees.
Right.
So you end up with a mishmash of data from the corporation that you can't use to compare from year to year. You don't have, as an example, an economy-sized car.
Yeah.
The average cost of repairs is X dollars. We insure Y such cars. We have 3,000 cars that we insure per year, 3,000 only. that are worth more than $150,000.
Yeah.
And that's how much it costs to repair. All of that data, which the public should have a right to, because there's no personal identification involved with it, is not available for people, including the Insurance Bureau of Canada, who should have access to that data. Yes, they have a self-interest, great, but at the same time, let's see what they come up with when they take real numbers that actually have some meaning.
You know, one always has to wonder what's motivating them. I mean, this is a public insurer. I mean, this is a good idea, I think. This is like, if you have private profit involved in a lot of different businesses, you can see that they're going to be taking off a lot more profits than maybe they shouldn't. They can hide that or do it because they're private. But when you become public, you should be able to curb that, the enthusiasm to do that. But nevertheless, it seems like the ICBC has almost taken on all the worst attributes of the private insurance and then added a few more in the mix, especially because they are a monopoly. And also because there seems to be like a close association with the political actors in this province. So we kind of end up like the drivers. It really puts us in a bad spot as we worry about our rates jumping up. We really don't know how we can control ICBC because it doesn't appear that the government themselves has ICBC under control.
I think they probably had ICBC under their thumb in the last government. I think there's a question of who is in control. I think one of the most shocking things that I've ever heard is the fact that Todd Stone, who's the minister responsible for ICBC, was given a report that they had commissioned on the operations at ICBC in 2014 and did not know that before he was given the report, Mike de Jong, the Minister of Finance, took 7.5 pages out of the report.
And he did not know that?
He didn't know it until, I think, about a month ago.
Wow.
And those 7.5 pages actually discuss real approaches to addressing some of the problems at ICBC. And they were kept from the minister responsible. I'd like to know if they were also kept from the board of directors of ICBC, because now, and the boards of all Crown Corps are 100% government appointee. You get into a fiduciary issue of the responsibility of a member of a board of directors of a Crown Corporation or a publicly traded company to shareholders, and in this case, we're the shareholders. They'll be indemnified for it, so you could sue, but they won't have to pay. The problem, however, is, do they have the accurate information from Mike de Jong in order to fulfill the functions that the government had appointed them to? He didn't even trust his own colleague with the full report.
And that to me it's really shenanigans. It's really not fair. And he had his motivations that we'll probably never know for sure what it's all about. But we're just going to have to wrap up here. So I think if there was one thing you'd like to see, is there one thing you'd like to see them do that might improve the situation?
I think it goes for every single Crown Corporation and public agency in BC, and it's the same thing. Data released publicly, automatic, don't have to apply for it, don't have to file an access to information request, and use the exact same measurements that are used in 9 other provinces. Don't create your own.
Okay, well, that's a great advice. Okay, so that wraps up this segment, and stay tuned for the Walton Jack Show. Welcome back. This is always a part of the show where Jack and I just look at some of the most current issues that have happened the last few weeks. And of course, we can never escape the Kinder Morgan pipeline fiasco, the issue, whatever way you want to look at it. There's always something evolving out of this story that astonishes you more. So I think the development that happened most recently, Jack, was the Rachel Notley wrapping up her her demands, let's say, and now talking about not ordering any BC wine in Alberta. So it seems, and the media has really picked up on that and really gone to town with it. So what do you think's behind these sort of tactics that she's using?
I think, to me, the Kinder Morgan pipeline thing is interesting because it shows how the media can create, I think, a fictitious story out of thin air.
Yeah.
And literally within days, they have BC and Alberta fighting each other. Now, granted, it's been building up for a long time. I think, I felt from following the media coverage that this was about jobs. The jobs in Alberta were threatened.
Yeah.
And Rachel Notley was righteously indignant because of it. But I contacted Unifor. Unifor is the biggest private sector union in the country. They represent 12,000 people in the energy sector, including people in Fort McMurray and people in the tar sands and blah, blah, blah.
And the pipeline builders and all that.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Unifor is opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Unifor is opposed to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. And for the media to concoct this story and pit us Canadians against each other on behalf of the corporate oil industry.
That's astonishing, Jack.
Is exactly how they operate on every issue 365 days a year. This is the kind of rampant evil that we are up against.
Now, did the Unifor give their reasons why they weren't supporting building this pipeline?
Yeah, they don't want to see raw materials exported from Canada. They think it's bad for jobs in Canada.
Yeah.
Now, they want to see refining done in Alberta, etc. Myself, personally, I want to close down the whole industry, and the jobs have got to come in the future from something less poisonous. And the jobs, and of course, everybody should have jobs and can have jobs. This is about corporate profit.
Right.
Jobs don't even factor into it. But they are opposed because they say this is bad for jobs in Canada.
Okay, so we should just mention that. I mean, why don't they refine the oil in Alberta? Because if they did that, there'd be a lot less of a product to go through a pipeline. And also, it probably is a lot less harmful if it's spilt than this raw bitumen. So does the Alberta government ever give its reasons why they won't refine it in Alberta?
I don't know, but it's a good question. But I can tell you why I think they don't refine it, Alberta, because Canada is a third world exporter of raw materials. We do it with everything. That's what Canada is on the world stage. And the people who run the world stage, the massive worldwide corporations, controlled Justin Trudeau, just like they controlled Stephen Harper, just like they controlled Paul Martin, just like they controlled Jean Chrétien. I mean, our governments do not work for us, and that and the total corporate ownership of the big media are the two fundamental issues that if we don't deal with them, I don't think we can fix up anything else, because as long as they own the media and they control the governments, what hope do we have on any issue?
Well, you know, I was thinking like Rachel Notley, we could start calling her like Rachel Trump. Every day there's something new that she's saying. She's been so bombastic about it. There's very little thought that goes behind it. I mean, if you look at this idea of banning BC wines, firstly, a lot of the BC wineries are owned by Albertans. But like in Quebec, within hours, they were onto it. And they were saying, yeah, they're all toasting and drinking BC wines and rallying behind the BCers on this. But for a premier to attack an industry that has nothing to do with what she's concerned about and has no concern about the unintended consequences, to me, she's just acting like any other what would have been a very right-wing premier.
Exactly. And that's exactly what she is. She's happy to be the premier.
Yeah.
And she'll do what she's told. And she doesn't do what she's told by the people of Alberta. She does what she's told by the people who run Alberta, which is, of course, the oil industry.
Yeah.
As was stated very clearly in a book by the former leader of the Liberal Party of Alberta. Have you heard about this?
No.
Yeah, he wrote a book, and he said basically, big oil runs Alberta.
Yeah. It's not as big a part of the Alberta economy as we have come to believe. And I don't have the numbers on that, but it's quite surprisingly low. And if you look at how they've run the oil industry in Canada, and particularly in Alberta, comparing it to any other country, we got nothing out of our resources. In Norway, they have $1 trillion socked away. They tax oil companies at 80%.
And the oil companies are happy to be there.
They're all happy to be doing it.
$1 trillion. Say that again a few times.
$1 trillion. Norway is just about 7 million people. It's a tiny country.
And they pump less oil than Alberta.
They pump less. They've been at it about the same amount of time. All we have is huge gouging holes, especially in Alberta, and oil wells, thousands of oil wells that somebody's going to have to deal with, that the oil companies are walking away from. We have an environmental catastrophe on our hands, and we have nothing to show for it.
And that's not the story in the corporate-owned media, right? The story in the corporate-owned media is the people of Alberta fighting the people of BC over jobs, which is that's how they manipulate us.
Yeah.
The only really independent television left in Canada is community television.
Yeah.
And it's disappearing fast. It's already closed in Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, and other major centers, and it's going to be gone soon. And the reason it's going to be gone is because the people who run this country and this industry do not want independent voices saying anything like what we've just been saying.
Although we are broadcasting from the Shaw Network in the Shaw studio here.
No, we're not. We're broadcasting on the community television network in the community television studio that Shaw put its name on.
Yeah, but it's still, they still own it.
No, we own it.
Well, this equipment that we
licensee.
see around us.
Yeah, but we pay them to do it.
Yeah.
If it was run by a community board, which there's no reason it isn't, except for the same reason as everything else, then it would be a different name. It's not really Shaw's. I don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it's really Shaw's station.
Okay. Point taken. Okay. Let's set Kinder Morgan aside a bit. I mean, Trudeau has been in the news a lot, and he was here a couple of weeks ago at a meeting in the NIMO, and we saw how that all went.
I didn't see any of it on TV.
It was very, very depressing to see that sort of setup that they had there. Trudeau waltzes in, and they're all enthralled by the Prime Minister. And there's a lot of people there that really have serious concerns, that want to be heard, that know they're not going to be heard. And so some of them get hauled out of the hall, of course, and then Trudeau looks like the shining knight. But nothing at all is resolved. And Trudeau has approved the Kinder Morgan pipeline, for instance. It seems like no matter what the industry wants, they get. And if you look at Trudeau's close advisors, there's a lot of petroleum industry executives sitting right beside him daily, talking in his ear, telling him what to do next. I mean, what are we supposed to think when he has those high-level advisors that are closely associated with the industry right beside him? And also, there's others that Trudeau have that his I don't know what you call this fellow that promoted Trudeau and had him run for the leadership, and he also has associations with industry and with other funders.
Well, that's exactly what it is. That's how our governments are run.
Yeah.
The power structure finds the guy.
Yeah.
They bring him in, they back him, they support him, he wins, he becomes the Prime Minister, he is their guy.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to play that game, you're not going to be the Prime Minister or the Premier of any province in this country, because that's the game and that's how it's run. Exactly like that.
Well, it seems that way. I mean, in British Columbia, we have the Green Party. I mean, there's a lot of flaws in the party too, but at least with that third-party voice, particularly what we have right now, there is a chance that we can get something good to happen here in this province that might be quite limited. So do you think the NDP are talking about having this referendum on proportional representation? Do you think that we have a pretty good chance of getting there to the point where they're going to have that vote?
Personally, I think no. I think that proportional representation is so important that the people who run this province and this country will never let us have it. Do people want it? Of course. That's why Trudeau got elected. If he had opposed proportional representation, he never would have been elected Prime Minister, right? The NDP would have been elected.
Yeah.
That's how popular. And then, of course, it was never going to be done. It was always a lie. And then, and we're in the same boat now. Proportional representation is more democratic. It does give people more of a voice. That's why for the last 20 years and longer, Central Europe and the Scandinavian countries, most of which use proportional representation, have led the way on environmental issues, so many issues, right? It's partly because of their voting system. Well, they don't want us to have that, our rulers, and they will never, if we're already, I mean, the media, total, never-ending criticism of proportional representation. Every time you hear it, it's in a negative sense. That's what we have to fight against.
So what kind of a scenario would you see that maybe would lead to where we're not going to have that referendum? What could happen that would keep us from having that referendum?
Well, I assume we will have the referendum unless the government falls.
Right.
There's a bit of a poison pill written in. The election is supposed to be, I think, in October of 2021. But if it's held before July of 2021, then I think that no matter what we vote in the referendum, the election will be held under the old system.
Oh, very interesting.
As far as I know, that is completely correct.
Yeah.
It's funny that nobody knows about it. I just came upon it purely by accident.
You know, I think what you're saying is if the election's held before the due date, it would be because the government has been brought down by for one issue or another.
Yeah, let's say the media creates a scandal just in the nick of time, and the government falls. Oh,
yeah, but the people that would have to buy into that scandal and to actually
people always buy into a scandal
would have to be the Green
Party.
Party.
Fighting between Alberta and BC. The media is very effective. I bought into it for my whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, the war in Vietnam, I was a total believer. Yeah, the United States is out there fighting for democracy and justice, killing 3 million people, but they all deserve to be killed.
Yeah.
You know, then you find that the whole thing was a lie, and you've been manipulated completely and totally.
Well, you know, if you think about it, like the Greens have been sort of neutered because they can't really say, no, you've gone over the line, we're not going to support you anymore, because no matter what the NDP does, if they do that, then they're not going to get a crack at voting for proportional representation.
I know, and proportional representation is very, 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 very important. That's why I really hope our side just fights the fight of our lives, because it's going to take that. The other side is
so I think too that we really have to hold the Green Party and Andrew Weaver's feet to the fire and ask them to slow down some of the rhetoric they're using. When Horgan went off to China on a trade mission or something, I can't remember the exact.
I don't think so. Just let him have it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, but if you bring the government down, you're not going to have your proportional representation. So unfortunately, I think they always have to preface every remark they make saying, we're really against that. However, we're going to have this vote, no matter how they're trying to manipulate us, we're going to stay with this government until we have this vote, because that's more important than anything else.
We really shouldn't have to fight for it like this. But you do. You have to fight for democracy, because the people who run the country ain't going to give it away.
There you go. Okay, well, that's going to wrap up this segment. So we have with us Will Smith today. Will's our editor and director here on the show. And Will's always bringing in some interesting topics and things to discuss. So welcome to the show, Will.
Thank you, Walt. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Will, firstly, okay, what do you think? Are we going in the right direction with our kids focusing so much on technology?
Well, I was just reading an article, and I know a lot of people are focused on technology and getting kids involved in it at a younger age, but there's some evidence that actually working outside and being in nature is very helpful. I printed an article, and I'll just read this. Studies show that kids who learn outdoors have better academic results, including higher scores on standardized tests, while they learn to love the outdoors and have fun. Nature-based preschools have been popular in Europe for decades, especially in Germany and Scandinavia. And I'd like to point out that, interestingly enough, those are the countries that have proportional voting. It's kind of interesting. I mean, that may be just a total coincidence. Nevertheless, they're relatively new here in the U.S., but are becoming much more common. And of course, we have had Dave Friend on the show a couple of times. He's had Mr. Organic, and he has the Growing Young Farmers program in some of the schools here on,
That's right.
In the Saanich Peninsula area. But now they're also starting out a new program where they get preschool kids. There's one, I don't remember the name of the preschool, but I'll put it up on the screen if I can find it. But they're getting preschool kids to take care of chickens and care for them, and then they lay eggs. And so this is really important because a lot of kids don't know where food comes from. They think you take the car to Safeway, and that's food security. As long as you have gas in your car, that's food security. And we know from several guests that that's, especially on the island, there are all sorts of ways that we only have 3 days of food on the island, so we do need to have a little better handle on food security. So I think that's an important thing to me to look at, that at the very local level, it seems like people are doing very long-term thinking and thinking, we've got to get our kids ready for the future. And that's an important piece of getting ready. Whereas at the higher levels, they're getting ready to run us off the cliff. I mean, we've just heard again about how about Site C and all that. You know, it's just unbelievable. But individuals and at the local level, people are taking action. And the other thing is that when we fail to plan for, we can't. Things are changing so fast. We can't really, I mean, to me, it's preposterous to make a 20 or 30-year bond issue when you don't know what's going to be happening in 20 or 30 years. And our technology is changing so fast. How can we possibly know? We do know that Mexico is getting ready to generate solar electrical power for something like 2 cents a kilowatt. Is BC Hydro going to be competitive with that? I just doubt it.
Well, it doesn't seem like it is. Now, when you talk about financing, I know you brought in some information about Bitcoin.
Yeah, I want to talk about just generally there. If you notice, the cannabis, the arena of cannabis is very interesting because there's still the national interdiction at the federal level in the United States, despite the legalization of it in the States. So, interestingly enough, though, people are having to find different ways to do things because they can't, the banks are not allowed to participate. So you have to use, so they use Bitcoin, they use these different cryptocurrencies. I printed out a list of the different cryptocurrencies, and this is just the top 20, but there are quite a few. There are pages and pages of these currencies. The total market cap now is approaching $500 billion. Now that gets to be significant because that's pulling money out of the financial system and putting it into an alternative system, which is totally unregulated. And it's just, I mean, if you want to buy, it's ironic that you can buy cannabis with Bitcoin, but you can't buy it with a credit card.
Okay.
Right? You can't just walk in.
Is that everywhere or just in some places?
It's everywhere. I mean, the states, I've read articles about how in California and Oregon and Washington, they march in with these big bags of cash. And sometimes the government can't handle it. It's coming in so fast, they can't even count it. So these things, when these things start happening, you start looking, at least I do, I start looking for where things are different. And so one of the things I noticed was that 2 countries have really embraced cannabis and are looking to really cash in on it. One of them, interestingly, is Colombia, but one of the entrepreneurs has started a Canadian company because he thinks Canada is the best jurisdiction to actually run the company. And another country that's looking at it is Malta, and Malta has done very well. They jumped in with the online gaming. They said, hey, we can move fast on this. We can make online gaming legal here and control it and regulate it. So they're trying to do the same thing. They have a legislative project right now to make cannabis legal there for producing medicinal cannabis.
Just getting back to the Bitcoin. So, wow, you have a credit card, or what do you have that makes the system work?
Well, Bitcoin is a virtual currency, and as you and I were discussing before the show, we're sort of suspicious of that thing. I think everybody knows that basically how the currency works. Our current money system. It's just borrowed. There's nothing behind it. Whereas a few years ago, we used to have, this is a Canadian maple leaf, a quarter-ounce gold coin.
Real gold.
This is real gold. It's pure gold. So a quarter, I don't know what, I didn't look at the price today.
Yeah.
But this is worth something like $400.
Yeah.
And if you had a Roman coin that was minted in, before Christ, it would still be worth the same amount because it's gold.
Yeah.
Now Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies, they're virtual currencies, so they work as long as our computers are functioning and everything. So to me, it's very interesting to see that those are sucking money out of our system.
Yeah.
But who knows how long they're going to last or anything. I think the powers that be in the banking system are pretty worried about it, though, because they're saying, I read some article, some guy saying, yeah, they're all going to go to zero.
Yeah, so but is like Bitcoin's not traded on Wall Street, or
well, there are exchanges opening up. Yeah, I think there are even futures exchanges now. I haven't kept up on the details of that, but things are changing really fast. Russia was thinking about making a crypto ruble, but I think they've nixed that. But I would like to just say about I've talked on the show before about how Russia is giving each person who applies a hectare, which is 2.5 acres of land, and that first issue. I think they have 30,000 people. I had over 100,000 people applied, or maybe 90,000 people applied, and 30,000 have been approved. So they're on those plots of land creating garden space. Again,
how
here
many?
we are.
Was it 30,000?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 30,000. But they have 145 million hectares allocated to do this program. So we're going to see what happens there. Right now, Russia does not allow any GMO into their country, and most of their production of vegetables is organic. Right now, Russia doesn't track, one of the reports that I saw, Russia doesn't really count all these private gardens as part of their food production, but it's over 50% of the food that Russia eats is produced by these small farms. This is a tradition in Russia, these small farms. It's been around forever.
Well, that's a very interesting thing.
Oh yeah, it's a very interesting thing, and it's not anything that you hear about. I mean, I know some people here who know about it, but very few.
Yeah. So I mean, with the farming, this is an interesting development. I think, especially if we had that happening here in Canada.
Just think, we could do it here.
We got lots of land.
Lots of land. I mean, what if the government said, "We'll give you 2.5 acres of, land that's just not being used for anything to anybody who will stay there for 5 years and work it," and then, I mean, I think we actually have the technology now.
Yeah.
To make that happen, as far as making land that's not usable.
Even in the Sandwich Peninsula, and if you really look at the land as you drive up and down the country roads, so much of the farmland is not being used.
True, but this is fairly civilized here. I mean, the land that they're giving people in Siberia or Eastern Russia, it's not exactly it's not.
The most prime real estate.
Yeah, it's not the prime farmland, but it's still okay. And Russia does have a very short growing season, even compared to Canada.
Yeah, well, anything that could get as a culture, if we all got our hands dirty a bit, literally, in the ground, I think it would have a very good effect for us, for our own personal health, to be outside and to work the land. There's nothing better for you than that. Nothing more fulfilling spiritually as well as physically. So I think, we have to get back to that, get back to nature more, just to help our children learn the fundamentals about what the world's all about.
And the other thing is that we really don't even, if you look at what's happening in the West, we're still doing this industrial scale stuff. Yeah. Whereas traditionally humans have grown their own food. And there's some indication. I was reading a book in Russia, from Russia. It was talking about how the DNA interacts. Yeah. And in almost all traditional societies, the people put the seeds in their mouth before they plant them. And what they're saying in Russia is there's an interaction between the DNA. The DNA of the person informs the DNA of the plant. And I was reading some stuff from South America on the indigenous cultures, and they do that. They put the seeds in their mouth. So I think that part of the thing that we're seeing here is that we don't even know the technology that we have,
Yeah.
the native technology on this planet. We don't understand it really well.
Yeah.
We call it junk DNA because we don't understand it. But
Yeah.
these guys that are making this food and, you know, creating all this corn that's raised and it's used, poison is used. I was reading about how much glyphosate is used on our food, and I mean, this is totally getting away from that. This is saying the food should be matched to the person, and it should be at a very individual level, not this factory farming stuff. So that's one of the most interesting things that I see, is that there, if you look at anybody talking about what we should do or what's going on, are they thinking a long-term thing, or are they thinking a short-term?
Yeah.
Are they thinking about our future? Are they going to, our real future, like preparing kids, or are they just kicking the can down the road until they're out of office and they don't have to worry about it anymore?
Well, you know, in petroleum, and the farming industry is one of the highest users of petroleum.
Exactly.
In the world. So, and petroleum is subsidized by governments. It's a wild amount of money is subsidies that the petroleum industry gets. So if you take like ships that are floating around the ocean, these massive freighters, for instance, you know, we have a couple of apple trees in our lot, and for a couple of months a year we have these glorious apples that we're eating, and it's so wonderful. And there it is, a tree grows, you pick the apple, you eat it. There's no chemicals, there's nothing.
Right.
And it's very healthy for us. Or you can go to the store and you see an apple from New Zealand, you know, on the other side of the planet. How could that be a good idea, to ship that apple all the way?
Well, I think we had to do it. I think we had to go through this, but I think we're just saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't working. This isn't how we saw it going in our minds. We don't see all these people dying from all these weird diseases that we didn't have 100 years ago and everything else. And, you know, a lot of it is just from the food, because what you are is what you eat.
Yeah, and we're not really seeing what's behind the growing of these crops and everything. I mean, it's a huge issue. Hopefully we'll see Dave Friend and Mr. Organic and that whole movement grow even larger. We've been supporting him for a number of years, and I think it's always you know, something that the kids can really use and will really help.
It would be great to talk to him, have him on the show, and find out how he's doing, how the program's doing, and I'm really excited about this egg thing, because I know how much little kids like chickens. Okay, the next time I have you back, Will, you're going to have to explain to me in detail what Bitcoin is. Okay. Thanks, Walt. I'll do it. Thank you. So that's it for this week. See you next week.